Ooh, today I am very excited because I have just received my Edelkrone slider that I personally bought on Black Friday. I think this was the only thing that I bought on Black Friday, and I'm really excited to try this thing. So this is a little motorized slider. This is totally not what the video is about in any way, shape or form, but I think it's cool because today I want to talk about improving your videos, making better videos, and more specifically 5 tips to help you do that. 5 simple tips, if you don't know them already, to make better videos. This little slider for me is definitely going to be a way to make better videos, but of course there are tons and tons of other ways. What is up, creatives? This is Tom, welcome back to another video. So as mentioned, what we're going to be going through today is 5 simple tips, 5 ways to instantly make better videos. If you're new to the channel, we do content like this all the time. I'm thinking of making this sort of concise video tips or photography, content creation tips into a bit of a series. Maybe we'll brand it up as something. Let me know down below in the comments if you guys would be interested in that. But without further ado, let's kick off with the first thing. Alright, so we're starting at the top, one of the most basic things in filmmaking, but also one of the most important, and we're talking about frame rates. In very, very simple terms, this is the amount of frames that are shown per second to the viewer. Different frame rates have different properties, so if you're shooting for a 24 frames a second, which is sort of film standard, and then you have 30 frames a second, which is almost more like web standard, and then you have higher frame rate options that allow you to have more creative control and do things like slow down your video and get half speed slow motion or even higher. On most cameras nowadays, they will shoot either 24 or 25 frames a second. I'm in Europe, so I shoot 25 frames a second. It's something to do with the lighting standards here. But for all intents and purposes, 24 and 25 are the same thing for the purpose of this video. Most cameras will shoot 24 and 25 frames a second, and also 50 frames a second and 60 frames a second. Those are sort of pretty much standard frame rates now available, and sometimes you are able to have access to these higher frame rate options, 120 frames a second or 100 frames a second, and it's important to know which frame rate you should be using to shoot what type of thing. So for 24 frames a second, when you want a completely natural looking motion blur, you want your video to basically look like real life, you definitely want to shoot that in 24 or 25 frames per second. However, if you want the option to slow down in post, shooting 50 or 60 frames a second is an amazing way to get slow human sort of interactions. If you're wanting to sort of particularly highlight something human, somebody walking, that type of thing, if you slow this down to 50 or 60 frames a second, the nice thing about that is it's just a little bit slower than real life. It will still look quite natural, but it won't look like slow motion in the sort of ooh, whoosh sense of the term. And then we have these higher frame rate options, and that is to bring focus and bring sort of emphasis to a particular action or something that is happening in slow motion. You should understand your frame rates and don't shoot everything in high frame rate options, so you have the option of slowing it down later. Generally, you want to pinpoint what you're going to slow down and what you want to shoot real time. Whoa, okay, so that was quite a big one to cover off for our first one, and frame rates is a massive sort of complicated subject. And this next tip sort of piggybacks off the back of talking about frame rates. And this is called the 180-degree shutter rule. When you have a camera, you have aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. And those 3 ways are ways to control light, the amount of light coming into your camera sensor. Now, a ton of you will be aware of this rule already. It's a relatively sort of basic filmmaking principle. However, I do want to mention it and also just be aware that I think so many experienced shooters don't want to mess with this rule. So the general rule is that your shutter speed should be double your frame rate. That will give you the most natural looking video, the most natural looking motion. If you're shooting 60 frames a second, your shutter speed should be 120. If you're shooting 24 frames a second, it should be 1/50. That generally is the rule. However, there's definitely times where you don't necessarily need to stick to that. And I think this is important because there are experienced shooters who won't change their shutter speed ever. And I personally just don't think that's right. I think if you're looking for a particular type of look, you can definitely play around with your shutter speed. For things like this is an A-roll shot. I want it looking as natural as possible. Of course, I'm shooting 1/50 and I'm shooting at f1.8. But if I wanted something a little bit more stylistic, maybe it was having some film grain and some slow motion in there, maybe I do want to ever so slightly play with the shutter speed and give it a bit of a different style and look. Okay, so these first three sort of tips all sort of tie in together, and we're now talking about variable ND filters, and I'm sure every single list on the internet has talked about variable ND filters when they're talking about improving video. What this basically does is it allows you to control the amount of light. It's an additional tool to control the amount of light coming into a camera. So if I rotate this round, you can see that the sort of light is actually just blocked out there. And if I open and close that. And what that means is that I can shoot with a nice low aperture and keep a sort of blurry background. And that is sort of, a standard tip of using a variable ND. However, what people don't talk about often is the fact that you are basically buying a piece of glass and you are putting it in front of your camera lens. What that means is that tons of people will spend a lot of money on an expensive lens. I do it for my cameras, and then they will go on Amazon, buy the cheapest variable ND they can find and put it in front of their lens. And what you're doing is you're just creating a massive bottleneck, limiting your image quality because the actual filter, the thing you're putting in front of your camera lens, is just low quality glass. Now this is an K&F variable ND filter, and it's not the best filter in the world. It didn't cost me £200, $250 like some of the more expensive variants on the market, but it is not a super cheap one either. So I would definitely go mid-range or higher when you are looking at a variable ND filter. And a super quick bonus tip as well is to get a very big filter size, and then you could just buy step-up rings for your lenses. And what that will do is that will save you a lot of money instead of having to buy multiple different thread sizes, so you can just have one and then adapt it for your smaller lenses. Okay, so handheld shooting. This is a great one because it's definitely something which beginners and sort of growing filmmakers really run into. Like, I bought a gimbal when I first started out making professional videos. Like, the first thing I need is a gimbal, and it's just not quite right. Do not be afraid of shooting handheld video. You can get some amazing looking handheld footage. If you have a decent stable rig or even a camera with in-body image stabilization, you're not going to be getting tons of camera shake, and it can mean you actually get some really natural, nice motion in your camera moves. A lot of the time I just sort of stand in one place with a camera shot, and you'll just move your hips and sort of work your way through the shot. The only thing I would say is that achieving tracking shots, that's where the camera is sort of moving with a subject, is actually very hard using a handheld rig. So you will need either a lot of practice or a decently stable camera rig that is not sort of moving a ton. So just to sort of get used to handheld shooting, stay in one place, get some interesting camera angles and some really nice camera moves just by sort of moving your hips and your arms without sort of taking lots of steps. A lot of the times a shot will look entirely different if you take it from the start of the day to you take it at the end of the day than if you shot that in the middle. The best time of the day is to shoot in golden hour, what we call golden hour. It's where the light is much more sort of natural. And what I would actually say as well is just being aware of where the sun is going to be during your shoots. If maybe you can shoot in the shade for the big sort of about 3 hours in the day where the sun's going to be directly glaring overhead, and then shoot your sort of most important scenes where you want as much mood as possible, as much sort of great lighting as possible. If you're shooting outside, do those maybe in the last sort of hour of light in the day. These things will just definitely improve your videos. There we go, guys, just some thoughts and feelings about quick tips to hopefully improve your videography. I was intending to keep this video nice and quick. It looks like it might be a little bit longer than I was expecting, but hopefully there's some useful information in there as always. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section down below, and I'll catch you guys next time.